Good morning, you're watching Business World Live. I'm Danie Laurel. It's 10:01 this Tuesday morning here in Manila. We're about half an hour into this trading day. Let's go straight to our top story. It's good news today. Remittances rebounded in the month of June as land-based OFWs sent more money home when the lockdown restrictions eased. You can see on your screens here, cash remittances jumped 7.7% in the month of June to over $2.46 billion from about $2.3 billion a year ago. This increase was mostly due to land-based workers since there was a continued drop in remittances from sea-based workers, many of whom were repatriated amid the pandemic. The rebound in June comes after 3 months of a decline since March when lockdown restrictions were first put in place. However, for the first half, cash remittances slipped by more than 4% to just about $14 billion. The United States accounted for almost 40% of these inflows. Meanwhile, the Bangko Sentral noted drops in money sent home from OFWs from Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Germany, and the United Kingdom. This as more than 135,000 OFWs were repatriated since the pandemic began. Kicking off with more good news, the peso reacts to those way better than expected remittance figures. You can see a strengthening a touch here. We're at 48.636 to the greenback. Recall that we had already hit, even before these remittance figures came out, we had already hit a 4-year high that was on the back of an expectation that there would actually be a GCQ happening, and that has actually already happened, and that was announced just yesterday evening in a broadcast. President Duterte easing the lockdown in the capital despite the virus spike. So even ahead of this remittance sprint, a lot of analysts had been saying that the peso would be strengthening if that would happen. Another thing also contributing, however, to the strength of the peso is, of course, the US dollar actually being rather weak in recent days. Now, I just want to take a very quick check at the virus count. You can see on my terminal here the fact that our Philippine cases are also still on the uptrend. And again, President Duterte easing that lockdown despite the fact that the coronavirus cases here in the Philippines rose by 3,314 yesterday. So we're just above 164,000. We are still the highest in Southeast Asia. You can see the worldwide amount that's around 21.8 million cases. We've already breached 772,000 deaths worldwide. So still a lot of uncertainties when it comes to that. Our trend of that Philippine cases is also just following that that we've seen globally. Now, what is going to happen as per the GCQ from tomorrow? The government is, of course, trying to support the economy while curtailing these spikes in coronavirus cases. That's according to President Duterte. Apart from Metro Manila, nearby provinces, Bulacan, Cavite, Laguna, and Rizal will also be placed under the so-called general community quarantine. So restrictions will still be in place, but at least there will be dine-in for restaurants. Salons will also be allowed to reopen. Let's just take a quick step back and see how our global markets fared on Monday. You can see on your screens here a very mixed picture when it comes to the U.S. stocks and how Wall Street performed. But take a look at the NASDAQ. That was up by 1% on Monday. Huge rally in technology shares over in the U.S., but still a lot of weight when it comes to investor sentiment. And you can see Asia stocks seeing quite modest gains, but a very, very mixed picture here, with Japan opening on the back foot, the Nikkei 225 down by 0.6%, but the Hang Seng in the green, together with the two indices over in China, Shanghai, and the Shenzhen Composite. Those are enjoying a little bit of gain. So there are new things going on, new tensions between Washington and Beijing weighing on the sentiment. U.S. announcing new restrictions on Huawei. So there's another blacklist that's growing longer over in the U.S. when it comes to Huawei. They've restricted another 38 of its affiliates in 21 countries from accessing commercially available chips. So they want to limit the adoption of Huawei's 5G technology. Another thing to be watching out for is oil that had climbed before another OPEC Plus gathering, which will be happening today, where they will be assessing its supply deal. Now, how is our local index doing after markets have just woken up to this news of a return to GCQ? Quite some positivity here on that front, up by 0.12%. We are still above 6,000, 6,075.76. You can see on your screens here the 1 month chart. So recall that we had seen this slide from the left part of the chart towards the middle crater here. We had actually seen 5 straight weeks of losses, and we've gradually managed to claw our way back up. So yesterday was also in the red, down 0.13%. Another thing that might have contributed to that slide yesterday, this according to PNB's Manilas Bona, is the fact that August 16, so that was a Sunday, marked the start of Chinese Ghost Month. So usually the index historically goes into a slump while investors typically hold off on the trading. Nevertheless, value turnover slightly above average at 5.76 billion on Monday, and foreigners reverting to net selling. That stood at 490 million pesos yesterday. Just a quick peek at our sectors here and what's going on. When we take a look at that space, a mixed picture here with financials gaining 0.9%, services and holding firms as well. But take a look at industrials and properties. They're not necessarily joining in on the rest of the rally despite that return to a GCQ or less restrictions. I also just want to take a quick peek at our stocks and which ones are buoying our bourse above that 6,000 level. I mentioned property stocks. That's Robinson's Land leading the pack up by 1.9%. But very, very mixed bag here in terms of winners. Everyone from telco, so PLDT, and energy company First Gen, with banks as well, so BDO and also just Globe Telecom. I had already mentioned telcos, but you can see Metro Pacific, Ayala Corporation, 2 big conglomerates in the losing end as worst performers. Now, speaking of properties, let's take a quick peek at that A-REIT. So that A-REIT, which had listed just last week, is now set to move on and offer 15 billion pesos worth of debt notes and also be releasing dividends. So the board has approved the filing of the debt notes. So there's going to be a 3-year shelf registration to the SEC, and they will be using the funds to leverage for future acquisitions and also preserving cash for dividend distribution. So again, very interesting, tapping on debt, but at the same time releasing dividends. They will be actually releasing 59 centavos per share dividends. That's from the first 2 quarters this year on September 15. Now recall that they've got 3 high-grade properties in Makati that has a very close to 100% total occupancy rate. They've also announced that they will be planning dividends on a quarterly basis. Now recall that the latest REIT Act, it's actually since 2009, so it's more than a decade old, provides that you need to distribute 90% of all of that recurring revenues to the investors each year. So they've just announced that they will be doing that. They've also just announced they're on track to buy Teleperformance in Cebu. Yesterday had already soared by 7.7%. If you take a look at how it's opening today, it's actually up by 0.6%. Nevertheless, the issue is it's still quite below the IPO price. It's trading at 25 pesos and 85 centavos. And I just wanted to break some earnings here. Frutas, one of the IPOs of last year, and how they've been holding up during the pandemic. Not very good, I have to say. If you do take a look at their earnings, they did report a net loss of 27.44 million pesos in the second quarter. That is a sharp reversal from the net income of 41.66 million in the same period of last year. That brings their net losses for the first half to 12.35 million pesos versus a net income that they also saw last year. Now, they had mentioned an unprecedented sales decline. Their closures, not only that, their stores were closed because of the pandemic, but the closures had also coincided with the summer months when their beverage sales are supposed to be at their sales peak. So to manage the loss, they've actually cut operating expenses. They've also started to reopen more cautiously since June. So they mentioned their sales are already back to around 33%. Now, another one to be watching out for is the ABS-CBN and Lopez stocks. I'll be pulling that out for you as the bourse operator, so the Philippine Stock Exchange, says they would be suspending them if they don't file their reports. So apart from ABS-CBN, ABS-CBN Holdings, Lopez Holdings, there will also be Pacifica and TKC. They have not filed their annual reports ending December 31, 2019. So that would actually result in automatic suspension suspension on August 20 if they do not comply with this extended deadline. So more on markets later on in the broadcast. Okay, let me just scroll down to our biggest headlines this morning. ANZ Research expects the Philippine economy to contract by 9.2% in the second semester. As a result, the economy is now expected to shrink by 9.1% this year. That's a reversal of the country's 6% growth in 2019. The latest reading is a downward revision of 6.6 percentage points from ANZ's earlier forecast. Economist Kanika Batnagar said the revised assessment is based on the renewed surge in COVID-19 infections, resulting in slow improvements in consumption. The economist also cited the unprecedented fall in remittances due to the repatriation of OFWs as the unemployment rate surged to a record 17% as well. The House Ways and Means Committee approved a measure extending the estate tax amnesty program by 2 more years. This is on the back of the continued impact of the coronavirus to livelihood and the economy. Now, under the Tax Amnesty Act of 2019, taxpayers are given a one-time opportunity to settle unpaid estate taxes as of December 2017 on or before May 31st, 2021. House Bill 7068 extends the validity of this amnesty program through to 2023. The proposal says the amendment will enable those who want to take advantage of the program to recoup resources and provide economic relief to Filipinos at this time of the crisis. Plus, it will also allow the Internal Revenue Bureau to meet its targets. As of June, the BIR has collected some 1.3 billion pesos from estate tax amnesty. This is far from the Finance Department's 6 billion peso target. The Department of Finance is also tasked to come up with its calculation and the possible rates for deliberation in the next hearing, as some lawmakers are questioning the 20% rate based on the Statement of Total Assets. On the other hand, Senate President Tito Soto expressed support for the proposed amendment to the tax amnesty program, but a counterpart measure on the matter has not yet been filed in the Senate. And this from the Philippine Star, the Insurance Commission is pushing for a 60-day payment moratorium for insurance policies and pre-need contracts under the Bayanihan 2 bill. This is after the Bicameral Conference Committee approved a similar 60-day grace period for debt payments. Now, in a letter sent to the Bicameral Committee last week, Insurance Commissioner Dennis Funa says the proposed 2-month grace period for policy payments will provide relief to customers affected by the pandemic. Usually, insurance companies allow customers to settle policy payments within 30 to 31 days. The Commission, however, argued that a 1-year moratorium is not necessary. While this may prove beneficial for policy holders, Funa says this will spell financial danger to life insurance companies. On the other hand, a compromise period of 60 days would balance the interests of consumers and the insurance companies. Funa explained that this will allow insurance companies to service their commitments and respond to the needs of their customers during the health crisis. Though no one has been spared from the wrath of COVID-19, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises are suffering the most. With less in their coffers to pivot and innovate, how can banks help them not only survive but also thrive? Here to share with us what BPI is doing, we have with us Eric Luchangco, Head of Business Banking. Good morning, sir.
Hi, morning, and thanks for having me back on your program, Danie.
Hi, sir. Thank you for also being back, and you look very well indeed. Sir, we know it's been bad for everyone, but it's particularly bad for MSMEs. Can you just give us a flavor of how it's been? Have you seen, at least from the BPI side, closures, difficulties to survive, having very limited cash in their coffers? Have you seen defaults on some loans? Just a general feel of the state of the MSME industry.
Well, I can tell you what we're seeing from our own perspective, right? And what that is I think what you're seeing is basically quite some challenging times for SMEs right now. I mean, it's a challenging time for businesses overall, but But as you mentioned, especially for SMEs, which generally have less of a buffer in terms of their cash reserves. So what we're trying to do is help them out during this period. But we are seeing a number of them approach us for kind of restructuring or rescheduling of their debt payment. And as much as possible, we're trying to work with them in order to kind of oblige. We have seen a few businesses look to close, but it's usually where we have a client that is in multiple businesses and one business is doing better than the other, and that they will look to close that business for the time being until things start to revert back to more normal circumstances. But it is a challenge for them. Yes. No, it is a challenge for them. There are extra expenses that they have to incur, and there are a lot of changes that they have to make to their business model in order to accommodate the new circumstances.
So when we look at bigger businesses, we can actually see a trend. For example, the non-discretionary items are actually have more weight. Like pure gold has been doing very well in the bourse. You've got digital companies, telecommunications as well doing well. Do you see some sort of sectoral trends or product trends in MSMEs that are allowing them to survive through this pandemic better than others?
Well, some of the SMEs are definitely either serving this segments directly or are serving bigger companies that are involved in these sectors. So there are certainly some that are doing well despite the circumstances. But by and large, the economy as a whole is off. As you mentioned, the expectations are for, call it negative 9% GDP growth this year. And that means that, it's going to affect both the large businesses and the SMEs. And the reality is that SMEs generally have less of a buffer to absorb this kind of pain than the larger companies.
Sir, Bangko Sentral Governor Ben Diokno said that that GDP print that we had seen in the second quarter would be a temporary thing, that was a sharp drop, and something that is already over. So the worst is over. Can you say that the same could be said when we talk about the MSMEs and having these closures? Are these closures temporary, or are we going to be seeing even more pain ahead, more permanent damage to these businesses, permanent closures? Or are you actually saying that, with proper stimulus, with proper loan, grants, grace periods, you can actually keep this sector alive?
Well, I mean, we're doing the best we can in order to support. And when Governor Diokno said that the worst is over, he was probably referring to the worst in terms of the fall of GDP. So from here on out, we should probably see GDP start to recover or at least fall less. But so in that sense, the second quarter was really probably the worst quarter. But it's a long road ahead, and there's still a lot to be done in order for businesses to really recover to where they were, call it, in 2019. And that will certainly take some time. And when we say the worst is over, I think we probably haven't seen the worst in terms of businesses closing. Even though SMEs have generally don't have as big a cash buffer as some of the larger companies, they have been able to operate so far, and they're currently revisiting their business models to make sure that they can operate under the new environment, under new protocols. And those that cannot will, at some point, maybe decide that maybe the business shouldn't continue to operate anymore. From our perspective as a bank, we haven't seen the peak of NPLs yet, as we believe NPLs will probably peak sometime next year. In fact, the grace period that's been granted to businesses through Bayanihan, at least the first act of Bayanihan, has helped forestall any closures. But as things go on, we should probably see businesses start to evaluate their business and how they're going to adapt to the new environment. And if they don't feel that there is a credible way for them to do so, that these businesses may close.
Sir, if you compare this to previous crises, the central bank has said, this is actually one of the times we have most liquidity going on. They've cut the triple R. We were at an all-time interest rate low. Is
Mhm.
this lag in that actually feeding into the system going to make it a little bit of a better situation than what we had seen, for instance, in the Asian financial crisis or in 2008, 2009? Just because there's more liquidity to be tapped into.
Mhm. Well, there are a couple of aspects to that, right? One is that there is certainly much more liquidity in the system, but we cannot say that this liquidity is evenly distributed throughout the system necessarily, right? And when you look at it, just because you have money doesn't mean that you're willing to go out and spend it. And therefore, what we have to do is make sure that people feel that there is a brighter future ahead, and that will make them willing to spend. Because if they feel like, I'm not sure how long this is going to continue for, then they will probably hold back spending. And what we need in order for a recovery to happen is for spending to occur, especially given that so much of the Philippine economy is driven by consumer spending.
Okay.
On the other hand, in terms of liquidity, the central bank really has done a lot to inject liquidity in the system. But as I mentioned, this liquidity isn't necessarily even across the board, and therefore, and we have to manage to kind of allow some of that liquidity to flow to the smaller end of the smaller businesses.
Okay, so it's more about consumer confidence and trust to actually buy products rather than the money that's circulating in the system. Sir, when you came here on our show the last time, you mentioned that BPI is looking into some reprieves, for instance, in terms of interest rates for the MSMEs.
Mhm.
Can you nuance that a little bit? How are you
Sure.
balancing between payment reprieves and survival, of also the financial institutions, which a lot of lawmakers have said if you have too long a loan moratorium, that's also going to be very negative for the sector.
Yeah, I mean that's an excellent question, Danny. Thank you. So when we look at that, I mean, BPI has gone over and above the requirement in terms of what the Bayanihan law requires, and what that is we're providing an interest rate discount to our smaller companies that have basically, they're generally paying a higher rate because they're in a riskier segment, and these are the companies that have taken out smaller loans and therefore are more vulnerable and therefore need more help. So what we're doing is, beyond the grace period that was required by the Bayanihan law, we're actually providing them with an interest rate discount that will reduce their expenses as a way of helping them kind of survive the crisis that they're going through right now. And this is what we're doing in order to try and help the economy overall and to help these small businesses survive. It's one of the things that we're doing in order to help them. And by doing so, hopefully, that will allow them to survive and keep their people employed, and therefore carry on this cycle of spending that we're trying to help revive the economy. But you also bring up the point about banks having to manage their own liquidity. I mean, like right now we're in a situation where we can afford to provide that kind of assistance because the banks are, as you mentioned, quite liquid. But we are a business, and any business is run anticipating some inflows and some outflows. And if the banks were to receive or to be told that you can have no inflows for 1 year, then it would obviously put a constraint on how much business or on how much we can then lend out to businesses. And if that were to stop, we believe it would be quite bad for the economy.
And also for your employees. So there's also a lot of people to be considered as well. Sir, that goes hand in hand with the COVID-19 response bonds called CARE bonds that you guys just issued, oversubscribed. Congratulations on that. Will you be issuing more of these? How much of the loans are actually being covered by the first tranche of these CARE bonds? And what does it say about the risk appetite of people? Are they banking on the MSMEs to be rebounding anytime soon? Is this a longer term play? Is this something that they just wanted to do to help the economy?
Well, when we issued the BPI Care bonds and basically in response to the COVID situation, we were able to raise, as you mentioned, it was oversubscribed. We were able to raise 21.5 billion pesos, which was a fantastic result for us. Our total MSME book is approximately 60 billion pesos. So it doesn't cover all the loans that we have issued.
Okay.
But the reality is that it also takes time for us to disburse these funds. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to kind of limit the amount so that we could make sure that we could properly disperse these funds. And that would leave for us the possibility of doing another bond of a similar nature in the future. But we have to first disperse the funds that we've already received.
Okay, and make sure that they actually manage to get back on their feet. Sir, tell us about this BizLink. So it's an e-cash management solution from BPI, and you're doing webinars to help your MSME clients to actually cope with the COVID-19 crisis. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, the interest rate discount we provided is kind of a one-off under the pandemic, but are included among our more regular services that we provide are basically digital banking. And for us to provide this to our business customers, we have BizLink. And what that does is it provides our customers with the ability to do many of their transactions online. And this is increasingly important in this environment where, again, business has to be more efficient, and it's more efficient to do transactions digitally because you don't actually have to physically go to the branch. And it's also safer from a kind of the contagion perspective or this pandemic, because you don't have to physically interact with people. Fortunately, the virus cannot travel through digital means, and therefore we're trying to encourage our clients to do as many transactions as possible through our digital means, both through the BPI app and through our online banking. We've been continually increasing the functionality of our services, and thereby allowing more and more of the business to be conducted online.
Sir, just a last question before we let you go. The consumer side has been quick to onboard during the pandemic on the digital banking game, right? So you can see the statistics of 300 times more onboarding in these apps, better in terms of financial inclusion, and also you guys have disclosed that as well. What about the enterprise side? Have businesses been quick to adapt? There have been some studies actually that are saying that a lot of businesses are still on wait and see mode when it comes to digital innovation. One study said that only 4 out of 10 are actually innovating, and everyone's just waiting for things to get back to normal. Are the businesses and enterprises, MSMEs, actually starting to invest more in this digital space and e-cash management solutions? And as you mentioned, you're providing already some help to them.
Yes, well, maybe not quite as quickly as on the consumer side, but we are definitely seeing growth in our BizLink in terms of availment of BizLink. And we are, again, trying to add more and more functionality to it in order to further encourage our customers to do more and more of their transactions online. So we believe that they will continue to move in this direction. Sometimes, when businesses have certain processes, it takes some time to make some changes, and they need to see how things are going to go. It's generally easier for a consumer to say, I want to do this, and they don't have to get any kind of documentation in place. But we continue to expect growth in this area, and we look forward to it because it's more efficient and it's safer for our customers to be using these means.
Okay, so thank you so much for that update. That's actually a very important sector to be watching out for here. It tells a lot about how the general economy is going to be recovering as well. Thank you so much. That was Eric Luchangco, Head of Business Banking at BPI.
Okay, thanks again for having me.
Thank you, sir. And that's a first look into Business Day. Today's Tuesday, August 18, 2020. Catch us again tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. I'm Danie Laurel, and we are One News.